Hi, thank you very much for joining me on BIP Chat. BIP stands for Business is Personal. Many of you will have been listening to our series of conversations with most fantastic sort of experts, and what I also like to say is potential suppliers, because I do believe that in life we tend to, when we're in business, be looking for clients a lot of the time. However, what is more critical than the experts that will help you build your business? And today we're going to be talking about property. And this is very relevant actually to everyone. And so just keep listening, because I
Mhm.
think we'll find it very interesting why this is still relevant to you. So I want to do that introduction in a minute. Let me first of all just explain what BIP is. BIP stands for Business is Personal. It's a philosophy Thomas and I have had all our business lives, but we certainly segmented that really deeply when we started our community in 1998. And again, when we started this community, Business is Personal 100, BIP 100, where we have scoured around to find diverse experts that we can get to know closely, and that they can support one another very deeply, and we can see the way their values shine through. So expertise is one thing, but also to know that you're actually getting support from somebody who's got deep expertise. They've not been flitting around lots of different opportunities, and also have values of really wanting to have an impact, and ones where we also witness kindness and just the sort of values that you want around you. So it's going to be a great pleasure of mine to introduce you to Richard Brown, who is a property investor, an expert around property, does public speaking, is the author of 3 books, which I'm going to be talking about 2 of them today with him: The Complete Guide to Property Finance and Property Investor Toolkit. And you can find both of those on Amazon. And I'm going to just talk about those a little bit later again. So fantastic to have you with us, Richard. Thank you so much for joining us. I know that you are away in your second home over in Brazil, and got some beautiful surroundings back there. That screen that you've got, I think you're quite near that at the moment, that place, aren't you?
Well, if you can see the background, that's just one of the standard Zoom backgrounds, actually,
Oh,
and
is it?
that's probably the Alps.
Oh, is it?
I don't
I was
know.
thinking it was some amazing mountain, and
It's
so
like,
that was
well,
really
I'm up a hill near, but I'm on an island off the coast of Brazil. It's called Ilhabela, which if you want to look it up. It's not quite snow-capped and not quite
no,
that big, but
I
it's
have
certainly very
shown
pretty.
a little bit of ignorance there, which will certainly make
That's
Thomas laugh.
okay.
My
Okay.
geographical ignorance, which is quite embarrassing.
No,
So
no, no, it's not at all.
you are the property man, and I knew of you long before I actually had the opportunity to get to know you. And you are certainly someone that many people have turned to in for advice on property, to build their property businesses, as a speaker and also as an author. And I know you run mastermind groups. So this subject is obviously very dear to you, Richard. And is there a reason why that became a major priority in your life? And when did that all start?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me on the podcast. I really appreciate that. It's really great to share. And I think share is actually the key word. I think, Steve Jobs says, doesn't he, that you can only join the dots looking backwards.
Yeah.
Um, and that's certainly true here for me. So, and the key dots are I've always seemed to be sharing in some way knowledge and helping people just throughout my entire sort of business career, and it's been quite long now. And it's come under different guises. People just seem for some reason to seek me out, and they offered guidance, and that became an informal mentor many years ago in different contexts. And then so I think it's part of my core purpose actually to guide people, to teach, to share my knowledge. And I made it more of an actual thing several years ago. Within the last 10 years, I've ventured into, well, 15 years ago, ventured into property full time. And mentoring and guiding and sharing my knowledge in the property arena came out of that, really. There's a bit of a story there, but essentially, I just started sharing information online, and that grew into writing and mentoring and masterminding, as well as other activities like investing and
Yeah.
developing and running property businesses. So that's how it came about. It's part of my core purpose, though. Can't stop it,
Yeah.
and I'm looking forward to doing more of it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I'm really hoping over the next sort of 30 minutes we can share some advice here. And what Richard and I were talking about as we were just preparing for me to press record was how relevant is this for everyone. And he said some things that made me very comfortable that whoever you are, it's certainly a subject that you should know, whether or not it's you want your children to understand it, whether it's never too late to understand how to work within the property sector. So yeah, to just give more context on that, Richard, when we were talking about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, do you want to talk about your own story, in
Yeah,
fact?
that's a good point actually, because I did say
Yeah.
in my story. So yeah, I got my first property when I was 20. And it was a little flat in Reading near the university. No reason why I needed to be near the university. I didn't have any help from my parents. I think interest rates then were 14.5%. And I had a little job as a telesales girl, and it was a strain. I had to bring in a lodger to pay for it with me. But it was really important to me from a very young age, and I didn't really think of the alternative. I did house share for a little while, but that was something that was definitely on my trajectory that I want to do. And actually, when I compare that to the challenges young people have now, because comparatively, I wasn't earning nearly what a lot of people who are earning a lot can't afford to do that. Um, and then I met Thomas, and we met when we were 25, and I was living in Reading. We decided to move to Farnham, and he had a property in the Docklands. I had a property in Farnham. Both of us could in Reading. Both of us could easily cope with those properties and buy a house together. But both of us released our properties, and it was due to not really understanding that you were allowed to have more than one mortgage. I thought it would have been illegal. Why should anybody have more than one home? I knew nothing about the property sector.
Mm,
And you said to me about this acronym FIRE just now, which I really liked: financial independence, retire early. And I suppose
yeah.
it's never too early to be thinking like that about property.
No, it's a great story and it's a great introduction, really, because people can relate to that.
Yeah.
You were saying, well, how relevant is this, Richard? And I was like, well, everybody hopefully has a home. I mean, not everybody literally does, but that's a different topic. But people will have a home, and yes, some people will live in you said a shared house, so a shared house which is probably rented, could have a rented home. Young people be maybe trying to get on the property ladder but finding it difficult. That's another big topic. And then the how I one of my sayings is our own home is actually can be our best performing asset, if you want to look at it that way. And then it can actually, property itself can be a home for other people that we provide as well. So, and in the context of financial independence and retire early, the FIRE movement, a lot of people who follow that type of thinking, they develop, passive income to help, fund their lifestyle, and maybe to retire early, maybe just to travel, maybe to have a secondary income or a fallback. So I would say that it can be relevant to everyone. I think for some people it may not be top of mind, highest priority of the moment. But what you started by asking me was, it's never too early to start thinking about it. And I totally agree with that. I
Yeah.
got my kids on the lyces as soon as possible, which is just a way for them to start making savings for their own deposit for their own home, and the government actually tops that up, which is really rather nice of them. So yeah, I'd say it's very topical for everyone at some point in life, and if it's not directly relevant for you as an individual, it might be for someone close to you or someone you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's what I would say about that.
Yeah, and we were talking about how a lot of young people want to travel around and sort of feel that sense of freedom. And certainly had young people say to me, "No, I don't want to be tied down by a mortgage. I want to travel." But the
Yeah,
reality is, it can enable that lifestyle.
absolutely. And if you take your own example, you and Thomas,
Yeah,
you didn't travel at that time. You went and got a home together by the sound of it. But if you had each have retained those properties that you had beforehand, you could have rented those out, and that could have provided an income stream. And maybe at the time it wouldn't have been necessarily a huge income stream, and probably with the interest rates I think you were telling me that you were paying. But but as time goes by, inflation has a wonderful positive effect when it comes to things like property, because you lock in effectively a purchase price, you lock in a mortgage, debt, but inflation works with you in terms of lifting rents and reducing the burden, if you like, or the purchasing power of your mortgage at the same time. And there's also an increase, hopefully, an increase in value of your property asset, which over the long term, we're talking a couple of decades, has always proven to go up. Now, there's no guarantee that will always happen in the future, but and that's where the retire early thing can come in as well. So you could have increases in rents, which provide an income stream. You could have increase in asset value, which can help you in other ways further down the line. So, or it could fund a shorter term lifestyle depending on, what your priorities and needs are at the time. That's just one example, and you could apply lots of little twists on that. I know somebody, for example, I met years ago, and he bought a house, and he actually brought two mates to rent from him. So he had a 3-bedroom property, and basically the other two lodgers in his own home paid his mortgage and all his costs. So he was living for free, and they stayed there for a long time. So effectively, his friends and lodgers paid his mortgage for him whilst he lived there. So he had, cost-free living, and there's quite a few little spins on that particular angle as well. So getting on the housing ladder, I know that's hard, but getting on the housing ladder and maybe staying on it, is something that I would encourage everybody to try and do. And then maybe taking on additional properties, which is not illegal, taking on additional properties can actually help with other things you want in life, lifestyle change, retire early, financial independence, traveling, those sorts of things.
Yeah, so that's nice. So we're sort of here talking about people that aren't necessarily asset rich at the moment, but it's a way they could start. But if we look at the extremes of the people that you advise from, I know it's dear to your heart to help the people get on the ladder and how to do that. But then the people who have got money invested in different ways, but haven't done it with property, the extremes of that, what are the ways that they can do that?
Oh, I mean, it's multiple. And, when I talk to people, I'm always trying to understand what their motivations are first and foremost, right? So there's lots of things people could do. It's whether they should do those things. So, someone with a larger, pot of cash or income stream, if they've got a short-term goal, the advice, what they could do could be different to if, let's say, they've got a long-term goal. And obviously, if someone's got not very much money, but is planning for a future, there's various things that they could do too. But just to take a couple of examples, a lot of people who come to me, have sort of, in fact, I'm going to give a reference to an individual who spent, 10 to 20 years in contracting. So you can apply that thinking. So made some money, okay, made a bit of money through contracting, but it's a tough world, right? You're often on projects and moving from contract to contract, and it's a bit like a drug. You can apply this concept to people who've got an expat lifestyle or people who've got a business generating an income. There's often a lot of stress that comes with that way of making money, but they're making some money, and then it's putting it to use. And property is a really good way to put your money to use. It's usually a good, solid, long-term investment. And so you can invest in buy-to-let properties, for example, and it's a storage of wealth. It's also offers the opportunity to generate an income stream. Often, it's never totally passive, but relatively passive in some cases, income stream. Though that asset can grow in value over time. There's a word I like to use, it's leverage. So you can leverage basically means, in this context, using other people's money, like a bank. So you can use a bank's money, like with a mortgage, and that means your purchasing power can be multiplied because of that leverage. So you can actually buy more than your cash might, make you believe you can do. So, and part of a, diversified investment portfolio, if people are not talking about property, then listen up, because they should be. whether they should be exclusively and wholly into property, well, that's a different conversation. But definitely, I think property should be on people's agenda if they in that position. And I've kind of touched around the topic of what could they do, but they could invest in. I specialize in residential properties.
Right.
Some of those are single family homes. Some of those are for sharers. Some of them are blocks of apartments, for example. So there's various things that people could do. Some of them actually, the industry term is serviced accommodation, but you might know it better as a holiday let. So
Right.
that would be another alternative. So some of it's for homes, some of it could be for more short-term stays as well. So lots of options, and each has their pros and cons.
And do you, if somebody thinks, all right, actually, I really need to get into this, but they're sort of hearing that they're not sure about the property market, because over the last sort of 14, 18 months, it feels like it's been disturbed, hasn't it? And we don't know why. I don't know
Yeah.
particularly. Well, obviously, the interest rates has not helped. If they're thinking, actually, I do want to get into it now, I feel, how do you mentor someone? Because say they just were starting out, but they had a vision that they would like to get to where you are with your property. How do they start? What would they be the
Yeah.
starting?
You start at the end. Okay. So
End in
you
mind.
do. Yeah, I probably one of my first articles I ever wrote was
Right.
where to start the end. So
Right.
what does that mean? Is what do you want to achieve ultimately? And
Right.
I always ask, so what do you want to achieve out of life? Because it isn't just out of property. People often come in and go, I want to go full time in property. I go, why on earth do you want to go full time in property? But it says, where do you want to get to? So is that retire early, or is it have a pension, or is it to have an additional income stream, or is it to travel? What is it you're trying to achieve first and foremost? Okay, what will it take to achieve that in terms of either an asset value or an income stream, or possibly both? Okay, boom, you've got a number then. I call it, what's your number? Your number in terms of asset value or income. That's what you've got. Okay, what have you got today? What have you got today in terms of assets and income streams? Putting aside job or things like that, because that can disappear. It's not certain.
Yeah.
So what do you have today? So then you have what do you want to achieve? What do you have today? And guess what? There's usually a gap. And often that gap can look quite big. So it's like, all right, so how to plug that gap? And that's what I would then do. And I
Nice.
would do that by working with, depends how big that gap is.
Yeah.
Maybe there might need to be a reality check about the size of the gap. But and what resources somebody would have, what they would prefer to do, or what they can and cannot do comes into it too, because it's not a one size fits all, situation. Some people are very shy in retiring, for example. So going out and knocking on doors and meeting lots of people might not be their thing. Some people are really good with their hands. And so getting involved in, I normally advise against actually painting and decorating and plumbing and heating, but needs must,
Yeah.
that can work too. So it's creating a plan. That's what I do. So you identify where you want to get to, where you are now, what is the gap, and what is the plan. And it's a personalized plan. And that, I can't stress that enough.
Right.
Yes, there's some common threads. I think I talk about property strategies falling into about, if I've got the word, it spells the word right. So 5 different categories. So they tend to fall into. And so your plan might pick up 1 or 2 of those different strategies, depending on you, your circumstances, this gap, where you want to get to.
Where you want to get to. And you've got this, so I'm holding up, if anybody's listening while you're walking the dog or whatever, you're not seeing this, but I've got a book in my hand by Richard called Property Investor Toolkit. And it's a perfect size book here, beautifully actually segmented as well. And you've got here strategy, criteria, reading in the communities, financials, letting and management. You've got all these sort of categories here of what you help people understand here. Do you want to tell me a little bit more about this book and
Sure,
why you
sure.
wrote this?
Yeah. So I started sharing my knowledge in property by accident because I
Right.
was trying to learn myself, right? And to be honest, when I was doing this, which was in the mid noughties, in earnest, really getting into this topic, it was like the Wild West, in all honesty. There was so much bad information. There were so many pirates, and there was some downright illegal things being promoted at the time, and it was scary actually. And so I was sort of trying to make my way through this place, and I didn't want to get involved in anything illegal or anything dodgy, and trying to make sense of it. So to help educate myself, I researched and I put together notes and things like that. And that ultimately formed the basis of that book. And so that's a signposting book, that first book, Toolkit. And it talks about the principles and the fundamentals of property investment in particular. And it's a great place to start. And it's quite a short book, as you hinted at, really. It's a nice size. It's not too big. You can read it in 1 or 2 sessions, probably.
Exactly. And I can imagine it just being something that people would use as a guide and refer back to at each stage that they get to with it. And so you've got
It's a
these
bit like
seven-part
sorry.
seven-part.
Yes. Yeah. So it's a bit like a TARDIS, actually.
Yeah.
So its size can be deceiving because there's a lot of links and other resources that you could actually open up. But yeah, you would refer back to it. You could click on one of those links and go down a channel which is relevant to you. But I do think it's still relevant, even though I wrote it a couple of years ago. It's still relevant because these principles and fundamentals are basically timeless.
Yeah.
Things like leverage, compound interest, those sorts of they're financial principles not taught at school, which I think there should be, by the way. That's a different topic. And they're in that book, and it's easy to consume and digest. So that was the intention.
No, it really looks like it. It doesn't scare me looking at that. And I imagine that's a brilliant starting point. And then you've got this book, The Complete Guide to Property Finance, which is a thicker book. But obviously getting into advising finance, that's a big area there. And so tell me a bit more about this book and what sort of person is picking this up and buying this.
So if Toolkit was this sort of signposting, rather small, easy to digest, consume book, then the finance book, Complete Guide to Property Finance, is almost the opposite of that. It's like a reference guide. It's got more than 50 different ways to finance property. I'm hoping that, I think there's 54 or 55 that are in there. And most people could name 1, 2, or 3 quite easily, buy-to-let mortgage, for example. But could you list 50 odd? So do you need to know all 50? Are they all relevant to you? Perhaps not. But that's why I call it like it's a readable reference guide. So you can dip in and out, and there will be strategies that could suit different people at different points in time. And remember, we're talking about this sort of the gap and the end game. Might be more suited. Some of those strategies might be more suited to certain individuals than others. So it's a readable reference guide. Don't be put off by it. You can put it on your shelf and just pull it off and read it. Read a chapter in isolation. In fact, I want to know about, bridging finance. I want to know about rent to rent. What's that all about? And just read that chapter.
It's incredible. But the fact is, you've got all this knowledge in your head. I mean, in terms of, because to me on the outside, this is a complex world and you could really make a mistake. And I'm sure you've seen people making mistakes and over leveraging, over gear, whatever the phrases are. But you've got all this in your head. So when you're running a mastermind or when somebody comes to you for mentoring because they're wanting to get into property, this is what you were saying, this gap in personalizing it. This is in your head. You'll know from auditing them what's the right direction.
Yeah. And by the way, I've made my own fair share of mistakes too. So, I mean, that's one of the benefits of mentoring, is passing on that wisdom, that learning of the mistakes as well as what the knowledge you've gained. So, I've got my fair share of battle scars, and I'm trying to help people avoid making those same mistakes. But yes, there's a lot you can cover, and I've kind of studied this now for a decade and a half, I guess, that sort of period of time, and practiced it. And I'm not going to say I perfected it, but I've done my 10,000 hours, or I've earned my 3 stripes, or whatever language you want to use. And it comes relatively natural to me to help guide others to their own journey, and the pitfalls that they should avoid. And I'm not afraid of saying that doesn't sound right for you. Maybe consider this instead. When the, there's flavors of the month, isn't there? There's like
Yeah.
topics of the moment, hot topics. Everyone should get into blah. And it's like, well, maybe that's not right for you, actually. Just because everybody's doing it, everybody's
Yeah.
talking about it, doesn't mean that's the right strategy for you. So I think it's all about personalization. It's all about, I know what's possible in broadest sense of terms. I've done most of those 50 financing strategies, for example, myself. And so I can impart that and share that with other people and hopefully give them a bit of a steer, which will point them in the right direction and keep them on the straight and narrow.
And do you get people contact you say, I am absolutely in the shit? I need
Yeah, yeah, I do. So I've got my alter ego is the property voice.
yeah.
And I had a podcast for 7 years. And I said, I'm going to take a bit of a break. Well, that break's about 2 years at the moment. And I'm planning to go back to it. I've written for industry magazines, Your Property Network. I've got my books. I've had blog posts, da 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 da. But
Yeah.
I often have people, especially when I was very active with the podcast, contacting me. And often they're coming at me with a couple of key opening lines. What's the best strategy to follow? I am in the shit. How do I get out of it? I've got a portfolio or I've got some assets already. Are they optimized? Are they performing well? What else could I do? I'm kind of stuck and I need to pivot.
Yeah.
What can I do, to do what you've done and have this location independent lifestyle or be
Yeah.
able to technically I can retire early and maybe I should listen to myself and actually do that. Um, but so yeah, I think there's a couple of different drivers where people come to me. I've helped people out of sticky situations, like they've got in trouble with a deposit with a sourcer and it's not gone well, or the deposit on an off plan and it's not being built, or they've got a property and they've got a sticky tenant they can't move on, or they've got a property asset that's underwater, it's costing them money. Could they repurpose that rather than just sell up or something? There's lots of different situations. So I help people around strategy and their plan. I also talk about their portfolio if they have one, and how to optimize and improve the performance of their existing portfolio. And of course, then if they haven't got a portfolio and they're looking to get one or to get their first one, those sorts of conversations too.
Yeah. Amazing. And one of the things I love, which I know you've said, you'd be very happy to send them this. And so if anybody wants to connect with Richard, I'm going to give you the how to find him. But also, of course, Thomas or I will always make any introductions. But you've got this amazing PDF around have meaningful conversations. And I really like that. And I wondered if you could share more about that, because that to me, well, that very much resonates with me about
Yeah,
the importance of going deep and being able to build that trust with people. So you just share a little bit more about that.
sure. Well, I thought it would resonate with you, and that's part of the reason why I selected that. It's a magazine article I wrote a little while ago, but um, property can be seen very transaction. Okay,
Mhm.
for example, somebody buying. I'm talking from a buyer or investor point of view here, but you see something on Rightmove, which is an app. You click, or whatever. You ask to go and view the property. You go and view it. An agent shows you around. You probably don't meet the owner of the property. You walk away and you think, need to do this, need to do that. I'm going to put in a lowball offer, which is probably insulting to the buyer who you haven't actually met or had any sort of meaningful engagement with. It probably get rejected, and that will probably be the end of that. And you'll have to do that about 100 times before you might get one who says yes. So that's not a very productive way of doing things, and it's not a very pleasant way of doing things either. So the having meaningful conversations article was talking about more of a process. And yes, we're trying to get to a win-win outcome. We're not trying to get to a win-lose outcome where it's like, oh, the buyer of the property gets this super huge discount and the seller of the property suffers a massive loss and walks away regretting the whole experience. Let's just talk about having a meaningful conversation with another human being, and getting to know them, getting to know their issues, getting to know their drivers and motivations. And yes, of course, with an intention of being able to offer them something that hopefully meets their needs and meets our needs, but in a more human way. in a more connected way, and hopefully in a more successful way. And so it's, you know, getting to deal with the individual human on the other side, and not just, it's moving away from transaction and into relationship in a nutshell.
Good.
And as a process, and I think I've outlined in the article, I never, a lot of things, as you said something earlier, and it stuck in my mind. You said, oh, you've got all this in your head and you know about all this stuff, or something to that effect. Well, that's true. I have all this stuff floating around in my head. And this is one of those things that was floating around in my head. It's just something I naturally did. And then I actually thought about it, and I thought, hang on a minute, I do this all the time. It's a repeatable process.
Yeah.
And so what I did in the article is I noted down the steps in the process, but I kind of reverse engineered it. I didn't know I was following a process, if you follow me. So I put it, there's about 9 steps.
Yeah.
And it's a process. And don't sound like a robot, you know, just following a step-by-step process, because it's a human. We're talking to another person. So it won't, you know, you might need to skip to, you know, number 8 when you're at number 2, but, you know, it can be adapted. So
No, really
that's in an article form, and I'm more than happy to share that with anyone if they'd like.
I love it. And I think it's interesting whenever we talk to our experts in all different sectors, when you live with something and you build this wisdom, because you're always wanting more knowledge anyway as an expert, because you'll never feel complete, do you? I think you underestimate the wisdom that you accumulate, that people need to tap into. And I don't know how many people must go into property without actually realizing how important it is to tap into the wisdom of someone else who's made screw ups. I mean, you cannot get wisdom without making mistakes. It's just impossible. It just means you've not taken any risks yourself, doesn't it?
Yeah, totally agree. And, you know, obviously, I guess it sounds like I would say that, wouldn't I? Because I offer to mentor and guide other people. So that's my agenda on the cards on the table. But at the same time, I offer lots of free and low cost resources to people so that they can actually do a large part of it themselves. And I'm a firm believer in that too. So, but I think I think it's an original of mine, but you never know. I could be stealing this, but I would say that experience is learning from your own mistakes, but wisdom is learning from other people's mistakes. So if you know, learn from my mistakes, learn from your mistakes, right? And then you can make a step change in your progress and growth and development by learning from other people, whether it's me in property or other people. Just, you know, don't just go in there willy-nilly, try a few things and find out the hard way.
Yeah.
Try there's a few easier steps you can take.
And is it quite common? Do you find it quite common that people are doing equity release in order to help their children be able to buy their first property? Is that sort of quite a common?
Yeah, well, the whole bank of mum and dad thing, right?
Yeah.
So I've got it myself with my own kids. Our kids with 3 daughters are all, you know, adults. Actually, one of them says, "No, I'm not an adult. I'm a semi-adult, a half adult, because I'm not an adult until I hit 30." So she's 27. So she describes herself as a half adult. But you know, okay, this is a guy with privilege alert, right? And they're young and they're starting out in their careers, and they don't have a lot of money, they don't have a lot of savings, and it's bloody hard to get on the housing ladder, right? We know that, especially if you live in a high cost location like the southeast of the UK, for example, or London. It's almost impossible. So, you know, dad and mom can help give them a bit of a leg up. And one of the ways to do that is releasing monies from your own assets, whether it's your own home or something like that, or, you know, help saving. So there's a couple of different ways in which people are doing that. But there's also a few ways in which that step onto the housing ladder can be made a little easier. So, for example, if you happen to be living in, let's just say, London or the Southeast, it might take you a decade to save for a deposit. And if you've got a good job, maybe there's 2 jobs that are needed, and maybe you couldn't actually afford the mortgage even if you could, right? But hey, what about investing in a lower cost location, which maybe produces a higher yield, and save that surplus cash and maybe start growing an asset in a different location and pegging that purchase price at that point, let it grow over that same decade or however long it is, and then you magnify your savings through investing in a property that's in a more affordable location. There are more affordable locations. You still need some money if you want to put a deposit on a straight house purchase. But FYI, there's ways to control property assets without owning them and with lower deposits or even no deposits. Pointed towards the book, of course, but
I like that. And I imagine the hotspots that are probably great places to invest that are outside of the southeast that are sort of growing. I'm not going to ask you to share those now. What do you think of the Help to Buy type schemes that are being done?
I think it's great. I mean, I would say this: everyone who hasn't got a home of their own should seriously look into ways in which they could get one. Help to Buy is an example. The shared ownership is another one, which is an example that can reduce the burden of acquisition. Then you've got saving schemes that the government sponsors, like the LISA, lifetime ISA,
Right.
which it's free money from the government. Then once you own that property, there's various things. I think I hinted at one earlier. You could take in a lodger. No, that's not everybody's idea of pleasurable home experience, but it's great from an investment point of view. You can add value to the property, do it up, extend it, and any profit you make on your own home is tax-free that you could put into your next one or do other things with. So your home, actually, I would encourage everyone, if they don't have one, so the more aimed at the younger generation, to find a way to get one.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of different ways. And if you have one already, then seriously consider having another one or two or three, and which is also possible, not illegal, as you've since discovered. Other ways to accumulate property assets as well as your own home, and then you're multiplying your chances of growing your wealth and growing your future income stream by doing so.
And I suppose a lot of people are putting money into their pensions, aren't they? And sort of giving their money to other people to see how they can make it grow. But you're another option to come and get advice from someone like you about, if I'm putting £3,000 a month into a pension, should I actually be thinking about putting £3,000 a month into a mortgage on another property instead?
Potentially, but I've got a bit of a contrarian view. If you talk to a lot of people in property, property sort of knowledge sharing community, like me, a lot of them just will talk about, oh, property is my pension, or they just will make a real strong case for property being the best place to put all your money. I don't actually have that view. So I think a pension is also a great place to put your money. Too, especially if an employer is making a contribution, and especially if you're a higher rate taxpayer, because that leverage effect that I talked about earlier, well, you get $2 of that with a pension. Companies putting in money, taxman's putting in money. So why would you not, sort of do that? But to maybe go all in on a pension, I think I would, encourage people to look at different types of ways to diversify their investing, and property would be a natural one to look at.
That's absolutely.
And if you're making money in your company, if you've got your own business, for example, you can actually channel some of that money into investing in properties as well to, acquire property assets as well as your business asset and growth. So that's
interesting.
Thing
so rather than just accumulating reserve cash that's sitting there, and that's an interesting conversation to have, because I think a lot of business owners, entrepreneurs, they have their own business as their only asset. They're not, they don't think about the fact that they could be creating other assets off the back of it. So I think that is a really interesting thought as well.
Yeah, and if I just add another one onto that one, is also the pension angle. So if you've got your own business, and you can have a company pension scheme called a SAS, SSAS, small self-administered scheme. It stands for. You can actually also use your own SAS to help with your property endeavors too. So a couple of little hacks or spins or different angles really that a business owner could look at to put their funds to use, even if you think it's locked away and perhaps you can't access it. So there's a couple of different spins there.
Well, that makes me think I definitely want to connect you to our wealth manager to talk that through, because I think that's really interesting in terms of, yeah, I mean, this whole, I look at sort of people accumulating wealth and how do they do it? And it's just confusing, isn't it? Unless you get to the experts who know how to do these things. And you want to talk to very, quite a diverse group of different people, your ISA, your wealth manager, your property expert. You need to really make this a commitment to think, am I actually using any money that I've got that I don't need in order to live?
Absolutely.
A
Yeah, I
very
think
subject.
sometimes property people and wealth managers don't always agree.
Yeah,
But I agree with what you just said, essentially, which is talk to different experts and people from different specialisms. There's the tax advisor as well. You want to add into that list probably,
yeah,
but you take ownership and control of your own financial destiny. You don't just gift it into the hands of a third party advisor and just trust everything they say rather. Take on different perspectives and do what you think is right for you, having done so.
yeah. That's
That's
very,
what I
very.
would say.
There's some great advice in there. I know that most of your time is spent helping people who are actually wanting to create a business out of property and helping them to really leverage beyond their own property that they've bought or one
Mhm.
rental. If I could just exploit your knowledge a bit more, I was hearing on the radio that there's never been more over 50s in rentals than for years than there are now. And I don't know what's caused that, but people over 50 that are sitting in rental properties rather than being able to own their own. Can you see a way out of that for people that are in their 50 plus, where because there's a lot of help to buy, there's a lot of schemes for the younger generation, but can you think of any way that people who are sitting, maybe people listening here who went through rough times and went into rental over 50, are there any schemes, anything that can help them?
Schemes as such, might depend on circumstances, but in terms of like, the LISA scheme, I think it is capped out at 40.
Right.
So that's not great. The Help to Buy has probably got an age restriction. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly what it is, but I think so that's in terms of commonly available, government sponsored initiatives.
Yeah.
But I would say there are the private sector would have the answer. So what do I mean by that? Don't just trust the government to have a scheme which would work for the over 50s. But I'll just give a couple of potential examples now. But let's say you partner up with somebody. That's from an investment point of view, that's a way in which potentially, well, hang on a minute, you're in rented accommodation for a reason. Perhaps you don't have a deposit. Perhaps you can't qualify for a mortgage for credit rating reasons and things like that. Maybe you live in a hard, unaffordable area from a access to buying type of thing. But
Yeah.
maybe you could buddy up with someone. Could be a family member, could be a friend, could be somebody in the property community. But in any partnering up type of endeavor, it's there's a mutual benefit. So what can you bring to the partnership? It may not be huge deposit. It may not be affordability on a mortgage, but it could be something else. It could be
Right.
time, for example, could be knowledge, could be know-how, could be good with your hands. And
Yeah.
so there's people going, well, I've got none of those things. How about me? But again, it depends on the individual, I would say.
Yeah.
And I think it, I did hear on the radio recently about a guy who was elderly and was in rented accommodation and was asked to leave his rental home by the landlord who was looking to probably sell or something like that. And that's a hot topic. And I
Yeah.
was thinking myself, what could he do? How could I help? I was even thinking of getting in touch with him and going to say something. But you can't help everyone in every situation, but there might be angles and options. It might not all be lost, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. And then
And
they have huge rents, and
yeah,
they've got the income, but they just haven't got the deposits, like you're saying. Whereas somebody may have a deposit but hasn't got a huge income, and
yeah.
part like that.
I almost flip it around and go, well, can you club together? And
Yeah, I
actually,
think it's a really good idea.
there's a few of you that the shared living model.
Yeah.
just with a different generation, and with a different way of acquiring the property. Yes, you probably share your home with other people, or share an investment with other people, but that could work
Yeah, I
potentially.
think what's been really lovely about this talk, Richard, is, I know what your core business is, but really at the top of this show, when we were introducing it, it was all about the values of kindness and openness and just caring about people and being so passionate about your expertise and the knowledge that you have, that you're not just looking for the next buck that you can make. And it's really shone through on this podcast, the way you've shared knowledge to people that would ultimately never become a client, and it's not necessarily your client target, but the way that you're open to pointing people and helping people. So it really has meant a lot to me, the way you've shared this, because we've got a broad range here, from the people who are just wanting to be able to accumulate more wealth, and maybe it's for their family in the future or whatever, and those people who are just literally trying to get by, and cope with life and get a roof over their head. So it's been really powerful. And anybody who would like to get in touch with Richard, of course, you can do that through Thomas and I. He's on LinkedIn, but you won't find him just as Richard Brown. He's got a WJ in the middle. So the
Yeah.
LinkedIn would be Richard WJ Brown. The Property Voice UK. So if you go to Twitter or X or whatever we call it, look for the Property Voice UK, and that's Richard's Twitter. On Instagram, he's the Property Voice. So Instagram, the Property Voice. Follow him. I think, as we said at the beginning of the show, this is really relevant to everyone. Your podcast, is it still able to be listened
Yeah, it
to?
should. Yeah. There's 7 years worth of back catalogue. It'll take you a while, but
Yeah,
it's often it's in series format, so you can cherry pick where you start almost, and
that's
watch a series. Oh, not watch, listen. Sorry, I
Yeah,
didn't
and
do
so
many
what would you
videos. More.
what would you look up on Spotify or whatever? What would you look up?
Yes, Spotify. You look up the Property Voice. You can find
Voice.
it on Spotify. You can find it on iTunes and other sort of
Yeah,
podcast, distribution channels.
yeah, it's great. The Property Voice is a great name. Um and of course, have you got a website?
Yep, and surprisingly, it's called thepropertyvoice.co.uk. Um,
That's brilliant.
FYI, needs a bit of an update, bit of a
Yeah,
refresh, but
that's
it's yes,
fantastic.
I have that too. So the Property Voice, is you just put that in Google, you'll probably find me
It'll come up with
somehow
it.
somewhere. Yeah,
It's been fantastic. And I just want to remind everyone that this 7-part toolkit that we talked about, if you put in Property Investor Toolkit into Amazon, I imagine that's the best place to go for it, isn't it, Richard?
yeah,
Yeah, the
yeah,
Property
it
Investor
is.
Toolkit. So that's a
And
really good thing for anyone.
ye-
It's so readable. And
thank
then
you.
in more detail is this complete guide to property finance, which has to be one of the most critical aspects of getting into property. And as you will have heard from Richard, he has so much knowledge and wisdom. So you've got so many options there for how you could finance property going forward. Been a wonderful conversation. I've really loved it. It's a subject. I know I'm not too old, but it is a subject
Oh,
I do wish that I had known when I was young. I really do. Um, I wish I'd known you when I was much younger. That's not me
oh.
coming to you there, Richard, but
No, no worries. Well, to be honest with you, I came into it late myself, if that's any consolation. So,
yeah.
my backstory, we don't have time for it now, but
No, you said
my backstory is that, well, I came from my starting position was bad. I was in my mid 40s. I was broke. I was divorced, broke,
uh,
huge amounts of debt, no properties, nothing.
oh,
So I turned it around. Um,
amazing.
and there's my backstory. So, I didn't have a silver spoon. In fact, I had a bloody, huge cross I was carrying, and I managed to do that. And part of why I do what I do is because I'm so grateful that I was able to do that and
Oh, that's amazing.
get through the other end. And I do have a bit of a heart of helping those who are in a tough situation, but I'm pretty good at helping people who are already in a decent place too. But
Yes, well,
yeah, thank you. And I just want to say it's really kind of what you said to me, Penny. Thank you. That's really nice of you to have said what you said. I appreciate that a lot.
it's lovely. I think, we've got to be careful of the intentions of people around the property world. And I know that there
Totally.
are some very well-known experts. You are very well known, but there are some that have got a louder voice, but it's not necessarily the voice that I would want to follow and trust. So Yeah, it's been real pleasure. Thomas and I were so thrilled when you joined BIP 100. We really were, and having your expertise and your values within it. So thank you very much. Thank you very much to anyone that's been listening to it. Please do contact me if you'd like to have a chat with Richard or get in touch with him. And yeah, I wish everybody great success with their property. And thank you, Richard, for helping.
Thanks, Penny.